I think it might be nice to start with a little meditation. So let's get comfortable. We're going to have 2 lovely hours together. Always starting with checking in on the body. Positioning ourselves in a way that we can be straight back, have a straight back, and also be relaxed. So we don't want to force it, no rigidity. Regardless of the posture, we're having the knees bent so that natural curve in the back flattens out. To be able to really relax. Let the breath come in easy and go out easy. Attention on our breathing. For some, that might be like coming home, resting in the breath. For others, it may not be as comfortable, but if we let go of all expectations, and just observe. Just notice how it feels. This breath coming in, going out. Breathing in happily, breathing out happily. Relaxed, and breathing out, relaxed. meditation, or the container for the meditation, is kindness, gentleness, and letting go. Notice how the breath feels in the body, and more than the breath, the energy that comes with it. Breathing into the entire body and breathing out from the whole body. To relax even more. Really letting go of all stress and letting go of all tension. Really enjoying this moment. Noticing if there are any hindrances present, restlessness, drowsiness, wanting something, wanting to get rid of something. any uncertainty about this process or what's arising in this moment. And for right now, just noticing and letting go. And maybe that's enough to allow stillness and happiness to take over, to pervade the mind. And as the mind becomes more still, spiritual feelings might arise, tingling or warmth. Or some other way that you know that you're becoming more tuned into the spiritual. And kind of beyond this world kind of feelings. They don't come from the body, they don't come from the mind. And there's a kind of joy, even if it's very subtle, that starts to arise. It can be felt through the body. Feeling, experiencing, and just watch it and encourage it in the direction of happiness and stillness, peace, letting go. If there's any mental activity, thoughts going through the mind, then we invite the mind to become more calm. Letting the mind rest. is still bright and clear. Encourage the mood of the mind to be happy and uplifting. Here we'll just spend a few more minutes as still as we can, just observing, contented, happy, relaxed. So I'm going to ring the bell. So we're going to talk about wisdom power. And I don't know if you had a chance to see the page for this meeting and the questions I put in there this time for people to look at, but regardless, you can just see what you think. So page 51. So, the first question that I asked to have you consider, in terms of this chapter, is about how wisdom has been involved in your practice, and particularly if you've used wisdom to solve any meditation problems you have had, anything that's come up in meditation. And it can be something.
Sorry, could you speak a little louder?
Oh, sure, Olive. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
You can hear? Okay. Yeah, so can you think of a time when you've encountered a problem with meditation and you've used wisdom? So in other words, reflection and the Dhamma, and maybe principles of the Dhamma in order to work with that obstacle in meditation, and how that turned out. Yeah,
Can I ask a question first? What is wisdom?
What is wisdom? Well, the Buddha defines wisdom in a few different places, and of course it encompasses more than maybe a single definition would in any one place. One of the definitions that I like that the Buddha gave, I mean, I like them all, but one that comes to mind for me readily is from Anguttara Nikaya 9.5, and it's the wisdom to know the difference between what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. So, our wisdom principle that we all work with all the time. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Where does it lead? And some of the easy answers are moral virtue. And another way that you can define wisdom is right view. And anything that would be considered right view, there's wisdom there. But there's also wisdom in, there's at least one or two components of every list that the Buddha had given that is about wisdom. So when you look at the Brahma Viharas, for example, loving kindness, compassion, gladness or appreciative joy, equanimity, where's the wisdom? Equanimity. That's the wisdom factor in there. And it's because it's like when there's equanimity, metta is like, well, the heart opens and, you love everyone, unconditionally, or however, it goes in its development, and so on. And then wisdom is, the equanimity is like, okay, I see the dark, the light, everything is affected, we are affected by our karma, we are making karma with our choices, and that's what we kind of are carried by from lifetime to lifetime, so on like that. So reflecting on the principles of Dhamma. Yeah, if you were to ask her, you'd get like a 4-word answer and it would be just fine. And with me, you just get the whole thing. Yeah. So if you ever want the short answer, just send it that way.
Now back to your question.
Yeah. So examples of wisdom supporting the practice, the meditation practice. Yeah.
One example. So I was sitting like my first long retreat at Spirit Rock, and these two things are happening. The first thing that was happening was I was sitting, and it's kind of like I had a boombox in my mind. And I think the music was a way to communicate kind of the emotions I was feeling. Recently gone to a Tears for Fears concert, that's not related anyway, so I had a lot of songs, and at first I felt very much kind of like an aversion it was, is happening, kind of wanting to shut it down. But I think the wisdom was saying, just let it play. Just let it play, and then, so I let it play, and I kind of listened to the lyrics, and I found there was imparting something to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, so I think the wisdom was like, receive it, the receptivity. And then likewise, there was a hindrance of sloth and torpor. And I thought, what if I turn towards it? What if I really feel it? And it kind of gave me a way through it, which was using visualization. And so I visualized that there was a physical sloth just laying on me, and it allowed me to give it kindness and, again, that receptivity towards it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a little bit of equilibrium, because it's not bringing it towards closer or pushing it away. It's allowing it to express itself moment by moment.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened?
The bell rang. It changed.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great examples of, applying wisdom. So it's just these questions obviously are just to help kind of reflect on, and this whole thing, like as we investigate this in these meetings, it's to reflect on our experience, maybe get some fresh ideas about how to work with our practice. And anybody else have anything they want to share on this part? Yeah, Daniel?
Well, I'm interested, after I tell my little tale, of this phrase, applying the wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
like inside of meditation, like how that would actually work. So my tale is of wisdom or insight arising, but not because I was applying it, or it arose out of the concentration.
Yes.
On retreat at Spirit Rock 2 years ago, maybe it was your retreat. It was the last night, and I'm a night owl, so I was sitting at midnight, so there's just a couple people. And now, you don't judge your meditations, but still you do. I'm like, not only did I not have a great meditation day during this retreat, I didn't even have one sitting that was great. So I said, I'm going in there at midnight, and I'm going to concentrate. Now, you could go, that's willful concentration or something, but it wasn't. I just spent 6 days on retreat, and I've been practicing 40 years. So went in there, went for the breath, and 5 minutes later, this bright blue shows up.
Mm-hmm.
The longer story, which I'll try not to tell, is this started 40 years ago on a self-retreat, and then the standard westernized Vipassana and most teachers, it's like, ignore that's bells and whistles.
Yeah.
But especially with Ajahn Brahm a few years ago when he was on campus, he was great. He was so supportive of it. So in that moment, midnight, last day of the retreat, this bright blue arises. And by the way, it came 40 years ago, and then I've been painting minimalist blue paintings for 40 years.
Wow.
So all the energy went there, because the teacher was like, ignore it. So after 40 years, this blue shows up, and the wisdom arose, oh, that's incorrect for me. Don't ignore this.
Yes.
Go there.
And
And it just arose. And I was like, oh, okay, 40 years later.
Yeah. So your question about the applying wisdom, I think for me, it's just a way of saying it, this is, what people often experience in terms of wisdom arising out of the stillness. That's the classical way that wisdom comes to us. It can also come to you while you're doing the dishes. It's like and I think we'll even read, if you read the pages in Stillness Flowing, Ajahn Chah would talk about how you can, have wisdom arise in any posture. You can be doing anything, and it's true. But to, just to yeah, it's a lovely example, but it's recognizing that sometimes it's just a matter of wisdom arising in the mind, and then recognizing it and going with it. And it's really can be challenging to know whether or not the advice you're getting from a teacher is actually right for you. And sometimes we can feel it, but sometimes we just don't have enough experience yet to know anything else. And yeah, I've also experienced both of those responses, or the way of holding that kind of experience. And I'm sure over 40 years, you've learned and you've experienced, like what it's like to follow your inner guidance and how valuable that is. And of course, we also know, enough about moral virtue to know that if there's a voice in our head telling us to do something wrong, we're not going there. But other than that, really recognizing and being curious and open to what can arise, to give us guidance. Sometimes really interesting things arise, like a phrase in Pali that you may or may not recognize while you're in that state, but then later. It's kind of the message. All right. Okay. Anybody else want to share anything? This comes out of this first part here. I don't see any hands, but this first part, letting go by understanding suffering. So Ajahn Brahm talks about how we need to focus our wisdom faculty on suffering. Basically, first noble truth. Suffering is suffering, meaning dukkha, which means not just suffering, but all of the range of dukkha. That's our kind of indicator. Oh, this is where I can investigate and find, what I'm hooked on. And so Ajahn Brahm here is encouraging us to remember that suffering is the nature of the world. It's the nature of the body and the nature of the mind. And so not to be scared off by it, or caught up in how much we don't like it. But he says here, instead of getting caught up in this isn't right, it shouldn't be like this, stop and focus and remind yourself that this is just the nature of things. So that's one way wisdom happens in our meditation. We've got something going on in our meditation that is not stillness, and we don't want it, but we turn towards it and go, okay, well, this is first and foremost, this is what I'm experiencing, and it's okay. And we can learn from it. So he said, when you realize that it's all just nature, like whether we're experiencing something we like or we don't like, or whatever is coming up, it's just a process of cause and effect. And we use the wisdom to remind ourselves of that in meditation, but we also remind ourselves of that in life. And eventually, when we really let that truth settle in deeply, then we don't anymore have any blame for anyone, including ourselves. But we still have that process of knowing what's wholesome, unwholesome, what's true, what's not true. Did you want to say something, John?
I'm sorry, I just, when you said that we don't have any blame, or And I struggle with that, so I just was wondering, and I see the wisdom in not blaming. And for me, it's like, if an animal does something, it's just their nature. I also struggle with judgment of other humans and myself. And yet, at the same time, I'll see humans and judge them, and yet, I also have, I don't know if it's Buddhist though, but everyone's doing the best they can in the moment, what they have. And so I want to understand that more fully about not blaming. Would that be accepting what is without
It's
judging?
accepting what is, but with discernment. It's not without discernment. And I'm using the word discernment instead of judgment because I feel like it's just to understand what's wholesome and what leads to what's good and what's unwholesome and what leads to more dukkha. Okay? So, when we see ourselves, when we recognize that we ourselves are perpetuating mental states that lead to more dukkha, we're taking action in the world that leads to more dukkha for ourselves or for someone else, or we see that someone else is doing that. So yeah, first it's accepting this is what's happening. So that level of acceptance we always need to have, regardless of how small or how enormous the situation is, the circumstances are what the circumstances are, and the first thing is you turn towards it instead of trying to push it away or make it into something else or act like it's not happening or it's not the way it is. So that's the start. But then there's the discernment about, what it carries with it. Is this wholesome or not? And if it's, I like what Ajahn Chah said, I've heard, if it's not good, make it good. If you can't make it good, let it die. So we don't want to put energy in the direction of something that's leading to more dukkha, something that's unwholesome. We want to try our best to do what we can to turn things around. And, even something in the physical body, we want to try to support the body to heal. But then there's a point where we have to accept this is just what's happening to the body. Now it's time for this. So you stay present with that. And we don't have to we don't have to suffer mentally just because the body is suffering. Because there's suffering in the body. So it takes the wisdom to understand not everything that we dislike is actually wrong. We might not like it, we don't want it this way, but it doesn't mean that it's unwholesome. Something like what's happening in our body is not wholesome or unwholesome. It's just the causes, it's just the condition. And so when we talk about seeing that, what people are doing or what people are experiencing, what we're experiencing is just coming from causes and conditions from the past. It's like when we see something that we don't like, it's not like we just now came across this and didn't like it. It's something we had experience with in the past, and that's why we don't like it. We might say, as an example. So
we wouldn't actually dislike something if it had not happened in the past.
Doesn't that seem true?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
If it's brand new, we don't have any,
Right.
past, but then our past goes back a long, long way, further than we remember.
So that differs for individuals.
It does. It can. I mean, there are some kind of built-in things, we don't like, damage to the body, for example.
Yeah, pain.
Yeah. There's some things that are just built into being having a body. There's some things like that. I have noticed some very strong, immediate, kind of reactions around certain kinds of things that happen. And yeah, it's past, from the past, probably something, but it also can just be the natural animal instinct around what's coming, what's happening. So there's all that. But the main thing is we want to be able to cultivate this ability to stand firm in the knowing or the Dhamma, and to be able to observe whatever is happening, be able to be present with it, be able to make clear decisions about how to manage it, how to handle it, how to respond to it, without being caught up in feeling that's going to kind of drag us all over the place. Yeah. So when we see that, we realize that what we're seeing is the result of cause and effect, then we also realize that it's not our problem anymore. This is just coming from the past. You can see that detachment comes from the wisdom of recognizing that the nature of suffering, by recognizing the nature of dukkha in life. So then you're just not so caught up in it. It's like, oh yeah, that's how it goes. So he says the whole job of meditation practice is putting effort into how you're experiencing things, not worrying about what you're experiencing. Not good? Yeah. Not worrying about what you're experiencing. Yes, Satina.
Yes, I have a good example of this. It was from yesterday. I was driving, and driving is really good for seeing dukkha and experiencing dukkha. And I was driving, and the wisdom piece that I kind of experienced was like an in the moment experience of expecting the unexpected. Because you plan X amount of time and you get on the road and you're like, it's longer than that. And that's just kind of the way it is. It's just like that. And so, yeah, I guess instead of being very frustrated about it and feeling, more pressed for time and the anxiety of that, just seeing, of course it's like this. This is how it's not how it's supposed to be, but this is how it already is.
Yeah.
And so not extending, not pushing down. Sometimes it feels like you're being pushed, and then the second arrow is you push yourself further down.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of a momentum to that feeling. So it's recognizing that momentum and going like, oh, the momentum is here and it's not mine to kind of personify. I
don't have to own it. I don't have to become it. I don't have to follow it. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. So focus on how you're aware of the hindrances. Desire, ill will, boredom, frustration, however that shows up. What's important is your attitude toward the situations you come across in meditation and how you react to them, rather than the situations themselves. And of course, this translates into life, just like you were describing. There's the situation. Here's the situation. Yeah, I'm going to be late. If you have my history, then it's like, oh no, I can't be late. And then you go, just take it easy. Take it easy, honey. You're okay. It's going to be all right. Okay, so then Ajahn Brahm talks about if you have enough wisdom, if you step out of the way, a beautiful clear space appears between you and what you're watching. And then there's no frustration or boredom anymore. if those feelings still linger in the background, you just leave them alone and you don't get involved or create more problems. You just watch and gather the data. So this idea of like, I'm just, I'm sitting here, I'm not here to get great, like something, but just I'm going to be here present with what arises, and I'm going to pay attention to it, and I'm going to investigate it and try to understand it. And this is, the next section is called Observe and Learn. And it's all about that. How do I learn about my mind? How can I learn about how it acts? If the mind, he says here, if you're having problems with a wandering mind or a sleepy mind, remembering that those kinds of negative states arise only to provide an escape from suffering. So then we need to start looking at what's underneath this. Why am I, well, maybe I'm tired. Maybe I've just had 2 years of nonstop something, whatever. Or, maybe I really don't want to face something I'm unhappy with, or something that's, going on. And then to be able to open to it and let ourselves be present with it. So when anything comes up that's unsatisfactory, that's when you observe, and you don't go into these escapes. Because when we escape, what escape, escape is going to be used in a different way in a minute, but this kind of escape is, I don't want to be present with this feeling. And there's all kinds of ways that we escape our feelings. That's the next question I threw in here for contemplation. It's like, what are one or two of the methods you use to escape? And it can be something like this, where you're falling asleep or your mind is restless. When we're working with feelings that we're experiencing in day-to-day life, it's like, I think I'll go shopping, I'll call a friend, put on the television. There's 1,000 ways to pull away from our felt experience. But when we get the hang of turning towards whatever that may seem like a really big deal is, then we can really start to understand it, and it starts to dissolve. So observing and gathering the data because you want to understand it. When you simply accept your experiences, then you learn from them, and then suddenly you're free of them. It is true, they dissipate at some point. Whatever's happening is just the process of cause and effect, he reiterates. You don't escape from suffering, especially if you're like on a retreat. Don't try to do something to escape it, but face it and disengage from it. So when we face it, we're not in it. We're observing it from kind of the sideline. This is something we talk about a lot, but it's so key to the practice and to the development of the mind. So then in the next section, investigate and understand, one of the first things Ajahn Brahm has here is that wherever you go, wherever you travel, whatever happens in your life, you should know that a change in circumstances never eliminates the suffering. And my question is, do you believe that? Yes, well, Daniel?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a kind of suffering that's true, and then there's other like circumstances that it does change. There's two different kinds of suffering. I don't know what word one would use to parse that out.
I've certainly had suffering decrease by changing my circumstances. I think what he's getting at, though, is that the mental patterns that we're operating in those circumstances have to then be faced and worked with. Otherwise, we find ourselves recreating those situations again, oftentimes. So it's kind of both true, and I think this is why we don't recognize that just changing our circumstances isn't really going to take care of the problem. And you see people do it, you know, go from one relationship to another, go from one job to another, go from one place to live to another in hopes that it's going to be better somewhere else. And it can be better somewhere else if we do the work of understanding like what's going on inside. You know, I can testify to the fact that you can go from one relationship to another relationship and have a completely different experience because of work that's done in the meantime. And, you know, it's like the changes we make in ourselves to understand the patterns, the conditioning that's come down in our experience, whether we remember it or not, whether it's from this lifetime or a previous lifetime or whatever, that's the work that really changes our life. And it comes with all the different components of the Noble Eightfold Path and the Buddha's advice to us. I mean, every piece of it has an effect and a potential to help reorganize that karma, that patterning, so that we can respond differently to situations.
So you would say, because an arahant isn't identifying with any particular personality, there's no suffering.
Got it.
It's not the past, who you were, or there's no identification.
Yep.
There's just the body and
No more greed, hatred, and delusion, because there's no more sense of self.
yeah.
Without the sense of self, we're free of all that. Yeah. And that's how the karma stops. They'll say an arahant doesn't make karma because that patterning isn't perpetuated into the future. And we can learn how to change that with individual things. Like if we have a thought that keeps coming up in the mind, it keeps coming up in the mind because when it comes up, we give it energy and it creates the conditions for it to come up the next time. But if we reject that thought, we give it no energy, no importance, then it's less likely to come up. And every time it does come up, it's weaker, and we keep setting it aside, and eventually it doesn't come back anymore.
Thank you. This is so rich. Thank you. And,
I can't quite hear you.
oh, thank you. It's so rich. And I use something I got from Louise Hay when I meditate. I've dealt with a lot of fears.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fear keeps me from inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I meditate and I have a fear, I just go, oh, it's a fear thought, rather than you're describing like kind of giving it energy or embracing it.
Or trying to block it away and escape from it. That also, in a way, gives it energy.
Just, oh.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, fear. Hello. I know you.
Yeah.
Yes, Olive.
My question is this. When I notice that I have an irritation when I go into the bank, per se, okay, and
Just to name a place.
yeah, right, exactly. And so when I know I have that irritation and I have experienced getting so irritated that I'm suffering, the next time I go into the bank, I don't suffer, because for me, the way that it works for me is that I know that I suffered when I did this the last time I was in the bank. So this time, my reasoning, or whatever you want to call it, says, well, you got so out of whack with this, and you don't need to suffer that way. So that, it's like I'm talking to myself.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that that ever disappears, but it certainly gets to the point of like, I can now enter a bank and I'm not irritated.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
I think it will disappear. What's the question?
Does it disappear?
I think so. It should. I mean, it depends upon your continued work with it. And the model that the Buddha gave that I really see showing up in what you're doing is understanding the gratification, danger, and escape.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you would see the gratification of the experience of going into the bank and having this irritation, but maybe there's some kind of protective mechanism there that's getting triggered. I don't know. But you certainly saw the danger
Yeah,
in it.
yeah.
You saw like, hey, this really, ugh, I don't want to do that again. And then there has to also be some awareness of like, why, why do I get irritated going into the bank? Let's just not do that. Right?
Well,
Something like that.
For example, with me, the logic that came up was, I'm retired, I have the time to wait.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So it's peculiar to my lifestyle, what I bring up to protect myself against the suffering. But it could be, when I was younger, that reasoning did not work.
But there might have been, in a different situation, there might be some other thing that would work, One of the things is to appreciate how good it, up there on the right, how good it feels to not suffer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And like, okay, I can stand here in line being ticked off and miserable, or I can stand here in line and breathe and notice people or just be present with that irritation. And it's like, it's okay, baby. And as you're saying, one way you could approach it was saying, well, I really don't have to hurry. I can relax here and just let it happen. How great.
Yeah.
And then you can use that same, like once we experience something like that, then we can use that same model in other situations where that arises. It's like even in your meditation, you feel irritated. It's like, hey, what? Oh, let me just check this out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering if there's kind of a fine line between being at peace with what's happening and kind of talking myself out of what's happening.
This is where the wisdom comes in.
Right, so.
Because sometimes we do want to talk ourselves out of our reaction because it's not wholesome, it's not productive, we're not really in any danger, or there's not really a problem.
So for me, when I've become more sensitive to when I consider what I'm doing is like, pushing away what's happening. So for me, I'm now at a point like, okay, I don't want to push this away, so let me just I'm trying to feel it. Feel into it. A little bit more. But and
that's
I
first
have to be
noble
careful.
truth. Yeah. So you don't want to, like, I think what you're saying is sorry, I'm interrupting you. You don't want to talk yourself out of, that's an escape route. You don't want that to be an escape route.
Yeah.
And it's our wisdom that knows the difference. It's like, sometimes we need to really be present with the feeling, investigate it. We don't understand it fully yet. But sometimes it's like, this is number 87. I know what this is. I've been here before 100 times, not again. So it really depends. It really depends. And it also, where I was going initially is, sometimes there really is something wrong that needs to be addressed, and we want to reflect on those things. And one of the things I've been thinking about more lately is like whenever there's discrimination happening around us and we want to be able to say something to like be anti whatever that discrimination is and put our voice into that. And then, even though we might have all kinds of feelings, we still have the wisdom and the determination to do something that's actually helpful and good. Instead of just like, it's not always the right thing to just be an observer. Isn't it fascinating, this thing we call life? It's like, oh my God. So much to
Because there's
learn.
such a myriad of conditions.
Yeah.
you know, every situation is different because you're different all the time. And then the external world is always different. So, I mean, you could walk into the bank 150 times and it would be different each time. I mean, there's certain parameters, you know, but you know,
Yeah.
some days you're more irritated, some days you're less irritated. Some days you want to sit with the irritation because you're just kind of curious. What does this feel like? And other days it's like, nope, I'm tired. I'm not doing that today. I know where that goes.
I'm going to set that aside.
Yeah.
And hopefully when you set it aside, but it is a thing, then come back to it later. Because if we keep setting stuff aside, yeah.
Big heavy purse.
Yeah, big heavy purse, backpack, carrying the rocks around. But yeah, it's, and the beauty of this, the Dhamma doesn't change. Can we come back to the Dhamma? What's the Dhamma here? What's the truth? What is the wisdom that the Buddha pointed out to us? How do we apply it? Again, with that application of Dhamma, yeah, it's like, how does it fit in this situation? What is it that
Because
is
the
really going on?
observing doesn't change. Everything else changes, but I was thinking of Ajahn Sumedho because, you know, he's in
The knowing.
news, right? The awareness, the
Yeah.
intuitive awareness, he calls it. That never changes. That's not me or you.
Yeah. And it's not a thing. It's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And it's the Dhamma. I mean, this is what early Buddhism states. It's like the Dhamma is the Dhamma. What's wholesome is wholesome. What's unwholesome is unwholesome. It doesn't change. Killing living beings is unwholesome. End stop.
So for me, the issue is always trying to step, or not even trying, but what promotes being in the awareness? What promotes, you know, the stepping back, the non-identification.
Yeah.
And I can't do it just by willpower or anything like that. I mean, it's kind of, I don't like to word, it's not elusive exactly, but it's not always available. Often it's not available to me.
And I think maybe this chapter, even though Ajahn Brahm's talking about meditation, it kind of gets to that. It's like, it's not through the willpower that it happens, but through the wisdom power. And so what is that, you know, like what Olive was saying to herself, or Satina, you know, it's like, what is the wisdom that I can apply in this moment to help me step back into that?
So you use the techniques, and sometimes you can dip in and sometimes not, but it's the techniques that are the avenue.
Yes, and then we need to update our techniques or try something else, or just, you know, step back in a way that's like, I need some perspective on this, or I need some time with this. You know, we learn with experience. A useful technique is to associate every emotional quality with its corresponding physical feeling. So this is what we hear all the time, right? To really what we're experiencing emotionally, to feel how it represents or presents itself in the body. And it's through that experience that we can, it's through that experience that we can, you know, really be with it, work with it, understand it. It says be with it for a long, long time until you know it thoroughly. When you do, you become free of it. And then he says, you understand that this is nature, just like when rain clouds appear in the sky. Here they come, it's the season for rain, there they go again. There was a question about this phrase where he says here, so he talks about becoming free of it. He says, when meditation is frustrating or boring, instead of making more bad karma, which leads to the obstacle appearing again and again. Just understand it and you can let it go. And that's what I was referring to earlier. How do you make more bad karma? It's by really identifying with this experience, giving it energy. Bad karma, you know, like what's wholesome and unwholesome, it's not a moralization, or, you know, it's really about knowing what leads to peace and what leads to dukkha. And so, you know, does this lead in the direction of peace? Fortunately, what leads in the direction of peace also leads in the direction of love, of acceptance, of generosity, kindness, you know, all of the things we know are good. Humility, lack of the sense of self, all of those things are part of peace. And so how do we make more bad karma? Well, it's that giving energy to the unwholesome and thinking about the situation in a way that builds up more mental negativity. He says when the I, you know, me, starts to get involved, there's the problem. Yeah. So you need to understand that it's not my suffering or my boredom. So stepping away, disentangling our idea of self from the experience. When you're bored, it's often because the mind isn't soft enough to appreciate the subtle aspects of meditation. I know. And also sometimes when we feel like we don't care about something that we're doing, if we put more energy into it and more attention onto it, we start to care more about it. And that's really helpful. If you get sleepy, it might be that mindfulness is not sharp enough to see the beauty of the quiet, peaceful mind. Frustration arises because you're impatient or because you think you can control your experiences, and then you get disappointed when they don't go your way. But when you realize that these things occur naturally and there's no controller here, how can frustration occur? So then he talks about this simile that he's been using a lot over the many years, the driverless bus. And so when I asked about people, you know, thinking about this, I suggested trying to use the driverless bus simile in an experience when you have an obstacle in your meditation, and just see if that helps. Like, oh, there's nobody controlling this. This is just happening. That kind of thing.
Greg Sharf, a lay teacher, he would say, "Who's driving the bus?" And I actually use that a lot because I get caught in something like, "Oh, look who's driving the bus."
Uh-oh. So does it seem like it's you? Or does it seem like nobody?
No, usually it's, you know, like some sort of irritation or, you know, something that I could let go of as soon as I notice, oh, that's what's driving the bus. And I wouldn't want that to be driving the bus.
Yeah. So I'm going to read what his description. He says, your life is like a bus with nobody in the driver's seat. That's what the suttas and all the great teachers tell us, and it's also what I say. When you realize there's no one driving the bus, all you can do is sit down in your seat and stop complaining. Since there's no driver, there's no one to shout at to hurry up and get out of here, or get out of here, or ask to slow down because you want to enjoy the ride. You go through ugly territory, nice territory, beautiful territory, and you're at peace with all of it. Every time you try to shout at the driver, you're not attending to what you're really experiencing or learning from it. You're getting involved rather than detaching, owning things rather than letting go, trying to make things happen rather than letting them be.
I think that's a little misleading.
Okay, let's hear about it.
I don't disagree with it, but I think that's on the level of the way the world operates. There's no control. But if it were completely true, we would have, if it were on a more mundane or conventional level, we are in control. That's what the whole practice is. Not that we can control the outcome, but we can, what you're saying, helpful thoughts, we can steer our little universe.
Okay, so this is an important distinction. What can we control?
Yeah.
Well, one way to think of it is not much. We can control our own speech and our actions and our thoughts if we practice it. But that's it. So what he's talking about here is what's coming up.
Oh, yeah.
That's the part we can't control. If we get angry about what's coming up or we get frustrated with what's coming up, then it's like, well, that's not where the action is. Yeah. Amy?
Point of clarification, did the sutta say like a chariot when no one was driving it? Because just as a metaphor,
You didn't have a bus.
I think Ajahn Brahm came up with this. It's not really coming from the suttas. Yeah.
well, just for me, like imagining horses with nobody directing the horses, like really works as a metaphor. But then the driverless bus seems different the way that.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna go with the horses because that seems like nature.
Okay. As long as it works.
I thought the horses was where you're trying to concentrate your mind, and so you use the reins to guide the horse, and rather than letting the horse just run wild. So the bus, I got a little confused. I see what you're talking about now for the bus, but I didn't agree with the bus until you talked about more as life and what happens during life. But I'm like you, I remember that image of the chariot and the horse, and the idea in your meditation, you want to not let.
Right. You're going to guide the mind. You're going to maybe tie the horse or whatever. There's another one where you tie these animals to a stake and they only can go so far. You've got it.
That was
It's not the one, but
no,
yeah,
it's
okay.
more like
But you're guiding the
driving it,
horse.
but you're guiding the horse rather than, in whatever way.
And you're
Your
guiding the
meditation
mind.
practice
Yeah.
is, there's so many different ways to practice. So that's kind of why I think that's the bus didn't work for you and not for Sid, but
Yeah. Thank you.
But isn't the passage, every time you try to shout at the driver, you're not attending to what you're really experiencing or learning from it. That is the line.
Yes. That's right. And why do we not attend to what we're experiencing? Because it's painful. We don't want to be with it. It's another escape. Yeah. Try to blame someone. Okay. Oh yeah, sure.
What was your name again? Elizabeth. Elizabeth, earlier when I think you had a question of how do you kind of allow the spring of the intuitive awareness to flow more. And I kind of reflected on that, for example, just the example of me driving. And I think for me, what was helpful is really putting in practice and taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, like in real time. Because just taking it's not me who has to figure this out. Like, how can I go through these other routes? And then like the Dhamma is like kind of petals, they kind of fall. It's like, there's the first noble truth, of course it's happening. Or, the Satipatthana is like, of course I'm in my body right now driving, and this is unpleasant. And so it's kind of like for me, it's kind of like a jigsaw Tetris. You want to put it in that shape instead of like a bunch of stuff on the floor. It's like untidy and there's no refuge there.
Yeah, I don't know for sure if I'm tuning into what you're saying, but when you talk about taking refuge in real time, the way it feels to me is like what Elizabeth was talking about of finding that solid ground, the awareness. Yeah, It's just like, oh, right, back to that. Are you online able to hear everything?
Yeah, it's working. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so
Replacing willpower with wisdom power. So we've already kind of talked about this a little bit. The more you allow passive awareness to develop and just endure things without reacting to them, the more energy goes into mindfulness. Stand back. Don't grab hold of things and don't try to push them away. Allow things to be. And as you do with the clouds in the sky. In this way, you're channeling energy into mindfulness, into knowing, and all those negative states of mind just vanish. Well, maybe, but eventually. Okay, but that's, that's kind of the idea. It's like, well, I'm not gonna get involved in this. I'm just gonna step back and watch, carefully watch. You know what the present moment is, and you know that the reason the mind wanders off is fault finding, saying the present moment isn't good enough. I want it to be better. The point of meditation isn't to get a nimitta or jhana, it's to create causes for nimitta and jhana to arise by themselves. Or another way that might be more in line with what Ajahn Chah talks about is not even thinking about nimittas or jhana. Everyone know what nimittas are? That blue light or whatever kind of image, sound, something that is coming up through the mind becoming more still, and any kind of thing can come. And there are these, as Daniel was saying earlier, there are kind of two different approaches, and this is what we'll see in comparing this with Ajahn Chah's approach is that Ajahn Brahm very much encourages using the nimitta as a way to go deeper into meditation, and that's from the commentary primarily. And Ajahn Chah is like, yeah, don't bother with the nimitta. You're not going to get stillness of mind and letting go from a phenomenon. And Ajahn Ganha says the same thing. It's like a phenomenon is not going to give it to you. Well, it depends on how you use the nimitta. Excuse me. If your attention is drawn to this light, or whatever the nimitta is, to a part of the nimitta or image that's very still, it's possible to kind of enter into it in a way that you absorb that and you go deeper into meditation, where you lose any need or ability to control the process, and it's happening, and you're basically having the deeper meditation, which can be so healing and so preparatory for wisdom and insight to develop. But it doesn't always, and it doesn't have to happen that way. But you focus on creating the causes for things, and letting go. Meaning giving up and expecting nothing, giving and expecting nothing in return. So you're putting your effort in and you're not expecting any results. Then he talks about being content in the present moment. And one way he talks about it is when you're meditating, ask yourself, do I want to be here in this moment, or do I want to be somewhere else? If you want to be somewhere else, you'll never be peaceful or get into deep meditation. But if you stop yourself, wisdom will tell you, no, this is good enough. I want to be here in this moment. With my aching legs and my itchy nose and this noisy hut and with my stupid mind, I want to be just here. When you want to be exactly where you are, where you happen to be, then you're free.
What if you don't want to be here, but you say, well, this is good enough?
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. This is good enough. And then you decide you want to be there.
Yeah, because when you say it's good enough, then it settles down all those annoyances.
Yeah, they don't have the
Lesson.
same power.
Yeah.
But also in life, I remember a friend I had a long time ago. I think he was in the middle of a big breakup. And he said, the way to work with this is to choose it. So even though he wasn't the one who caused it, he wasn't the one who said, we're done. But he's like, if I choose this, then I can be with it. It's okay. And then so it's kind of like that. It's kind of like, okay, this is good enough. This is the way this happens. This is the way things are. And being able to be there with it.
I had heard that phrase before, if I choose that. Did you say where it came from?
I think it just comes out of
Yeah.
experience and reality. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, we suffer a lot more. Well, is this true? In my experience, I don't know. When I've been the one to instigate a big change, I'm also suffering because of the choice involved. But a lot of times, the person who decides they want to break up has been thinking about it for quite a while. They're already used to the idea and their mind is already planning the next phase of their life. And then they tell their partner and the partner's like, oh my God. You know, they're really taken by surprise, or it's really hard to accept because you don't have the control and you don't, you know, like you didn't have the preparation. And now they have to go through that process of preparing for how do I live without this person in my life? That kind of thing.
See, when I reflect on the past and I look upon saying, okay, I chose that, it makes it easier for me in the moment, in the present, to say, I'm choosing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The 5-day retreat up at Spirit Rock, which you led, talked a lot about the mind in my book and what the mind does. And that, I think, backs up that statement of choosing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, another way of saying that is a little, but Ajahn Sumedho is, it's like this.
It's like this.
It's like this.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you choose, I mean, we all have our own approaches to it,
Yeah.
and so whatever works. But that one resonates for me, because I'm a little resistant. So the choosing part isn't so terrific for me. But it's like
Yeah.
this, can't argue with
It's
that.
like this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Ayya,
Yes. Oh,
may
yes.
I ask a question?
Sure.
I have two friends in my life right now that are suffering so deeply, and I can't imagine how they would choose, like my friend in her 40s, whose husband has stage 5 kidney failure and either will go on dialysis or, is waiting for a transplant. And it just came up suddenly, like they thought he was sick from something else.
Yeah.
And then my other friend in her 40s who can't be with her children and is alone in a room, in a darkened room. And, she gets exhausted by even just communicating minimally on the phone via text.
Wow.
And can never get to the point where she feels well enough to get any better, but she can't also, cut off her communication because her mental health just goes spiraling down.
Yeah.
And like there's no solution for her. I can't imagine how you could choose these things.
So I think this is what Elizabeth was saying too, that's not always the language or the approach, the attitude, but to be able to accept the situation as it is, to be able to go, okay, now it's time for this. I think it takes a lot of preparation, like 40 years back there of Dhamma, practice and then, like this idea of that's the way it is, or you know, this is something that, you know, we understand deeper and deeper as we listen to great teachers talk about it and we practice it with small things. And that's, you know, one of the things that I felt early on in discovering the Dhamma was that, you know, I wanted to get to that place where something like this happens. And it was actually, I was at a Baigiri one night, and Ajahn Pasano was talking about how the neighbor, Mary, had just found out that she had, her body was full of cancer. He said what it was happening is she was acting in a local theater company, you know, putting on a play, and she couldn't finish the performances because of something's going on. And she went to the doctor, and they said, you know, whatever they did to find out, they said, we have to have surgery kind of immediately. And when they opened her up, she was full of cancer. They said they closed her back up in the air. They said, there's nothing we can do. And she was in the hospital, and Ajahn Pasano went to see her. And she said, you know, I know that I'm gonna die soon, and I know that I might not be able to go home again, but I am so grateful. And she just, like, the Dhamma was arising in her, you know, like, and Ajahn Pasano said, you know, Mary, I'm not worried about you, you know. And I thought, I want to be like that. When that diagnosis comes, because we're all going to die, right? And we're all going to lose people that we love. And to be able to prepare ourselves for that is so helpful. And then there was a story that I heard when, you know, like people would come to Ajahn Chah's hut and ask him questions, and villagers come and foreigners come, and, you know, like all kinds of people, you know, come to talk to him. And this villager who had been coming to the monastery for many years was there one day, and he's crying and crying and crying. Do you know this story? Yeah, I've told this story before. It was so impressed upon me. At first, he couldn't even respond to Ajahn Chah, and so Ajahn Chah would talk to some other people and then come back to him. And finally, he was able to say that his wife and 7 children had died the day before from eating poison mushrooms. And Ajahn Chah's response is, that's the way it is. And, you know, to get the impact of that's the way it is, not in a harsh way, but with so much metta and karuna, and, you know, and the reality of this is what this person has been hearing. His whole countenance cleared. This is the way it is. Statement, with the energy that comes with it, of that kind of kindness and compassion and reality, is so powerful because of all that conditioning.
But what about, I mean, my situation is similar to what Kierman is describing.
Yeah.
These repeated traumas that keep happening over and over and over, and it's very painful because I'm so concerned about his well-being and care.
Yeah.
And so I have to learn to essentially live with the pain, because this is the way it is, and my biology wants to protect him, because that's my body needs to protect him. So, you know, once they die, at least you can have some closure. But I'm in a situation, and Kierman's friends too, of this ongoing pain. And I don't know how to live with it except to say, yeah, this is really, really painful and horrible.
Yeah.
And just be with that.
It's true. And I think it might be helpful for us to talk more about it at some point. I don't know. I can really appreciate that. It's and the other part that's so hard in the situation you're in is that it just has no end in sight. You don't have any idea how long this is going to be.
Yeah.
But, you know, reflecting again and again on the Dhamma, that, you know, the circumstances that human beings find themselves in. And one thing that the Buddha used to support people in situations is to talk about the bigger picture, the long view. Like, this feels like it's going on forever. The long view, you know, like we endure things. Sometimes it feels like for a very long time because our perspective is this one lifetime. And sometimes the Buddha would talk to people about, you know, all of the long past lives that we've had and the future lives that lay ahead of us until we awaken. And I don't know if there's any kind of, like, you have to kind of see if there's comfort in that. Like,
that's, for me, that's like trying to push the feeling. That's an escape from the feeling.
And I can understand why it feels like that, but I don't know that it is.
Well, there's also,
or has to be that.
I've heard some people talk about timeless love, something that does continue, like, through lifetimes. And I tried to connect to that, and actually had, I think, a nimitta moment of actually getting, the first night that I kind of slept back here at the house, and it was so painful.
Yeah.
How, you know, part of me torn out, and I was trying to connect to me through the timeless level. And then all of a sudden the white light came, and I was relieved of the pain and very energized. Of course, I can't make that happen again.
No, but you know it's there.
Yeah.
You know, and the reality is, at some point, I mean, one thing to remember when someone is experiencing this kind of, you know, Alzheimer's or this kind of thing, it's a disease of the brain, but Jaime's still there. And when the mind separates from the brain, all of that was in the way is finished.
Say that again.
Well, like some of the stories Ajahn Brahm shares, and some things I've heard from other sources too, that a lot of times people can have very severe dementia or Alzheimer's, not even recognize their family members for a long time, and then at some point they're very close to death, and they become completely clear, and they're calling people, saying people's names and talking to them about serious things, and then they die. And Ajahn Brahm's take on this, which makes total sense to me, is that the mind at that time when the death is coming, the mind separates from the body. We know that the mind separates from the body, and the mind goes on, the body's dead. And then when it starts to separate from the body, then it's not operating through that diseased brain anymore. And so at that point, you know, there may or may not be an opportunity to reconnect, but then it's just the opportunity in the next lifetime then, if that's where the karma is going. And so it's like, okay, maybe this is helpful. You have to see. I think because of the nature of the situation and how ongoing it is, I wouldn't be too concerned about taking in some ways of looking at the reality. I wouldn't like just fantasize stuff up, but the reality of lifetimes, you know, the long view. And if that has some peace in it, I think it's really fine to reflect on that. See if there's a way for more equanimity to arise. I mean, I know it's really hard.
Yeah, I just have to be careful of not pushing away what's happening by grabbing onto,
Yeah.
oh, you know, the whole like, what psychics come around the table and connect you to your loved ones.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, I'm just trying to accept this is dukkha.
Yeah, it is, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and the way it is, none of us knows what we have ahead of us to go through, and when we're going through it, hopefully we can continue to touch into the Dhamma. And you know, another really good thing to do, which you're probably doing, is every action of goodness, to share the blessings with him. All of this way that you make in your house available for these kinds of meetings and conversations and everything else that you're doing. It doesn't even have to be any, you know, big thing, just your good thoughts and all of that, to share the merit, the blessings. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a huge challenge. And we think about you a lot in it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Yeah, John?
My mom passed on August 5th of last year of dementia. And it really expanded my heart. And it was very difficult. I took care of her for 7 years every day. And we were very close all my life. I'm 60 now. I turned 60 right after she passed. And on August 3rd, she passed on the 5th. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking very loud. She passed on the 5th in the early morning. And on the 3rd, I was going by her chair to go to the bathroom, and she was very out of it after the last couple of, very, and I didn't know that I was really going to see her. And she grabbed my hand, and I looked at her, and there's something very clear. And she said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "For what?" And she said, "For the death." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she stood up, and she was very clear. And she looked at me and she said, "You know what I mean?" And I said, "Who's died?" And she goes, "You know." And then she put her hand, like she used to do before she had dementia, on my face. And she kind of laid her head on my heart. And I just had the strangest feeling. And when you described the diseased, it had left her. And then she passed at home. And it just was, we were so close, and I needed that. I needed to know that somehow, I felt like intellectually, I knew, but I just needed to see she was going to go from her body. That's what was going to go, not the dis-ease. And it taught me to lean on close friends and family.
Yeah.
I suffered a lot. But I also have Episcopalian roots, and they always used to laugh and say, "Well, you're kind of Catholic, actually." And I was like, "Oh." But in compassion, I think also in Buddhism, it's to suffer with. Is the root, something about suffering.
It's the roots for compassion, but not for the words that we translate as compassion.
Yeah.
So it's not the same in Buddhism.
Okay. But I just felt like with my mom, I carried some of her, carried some of her pain.
Yeah.
And she had carried pain, birthing me and changing my diapers. And I know it's my heart really does hurt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got 10 more minutes. And the last thing I had suggested was looking
At the sections in Stillness Flowing and in Ajahn Brahm's presentation, and seeing what kinds of themes you see that are in common, you know, like learning and being present with whatever is coming up emotionally or mentally, those things. Recognizing that what we're experiencing comes from cause and effect from the past. And we have this opportunity in the present moment to shape the future. And everything that we do, the love that we have for everyone, the generosity we express, and the morality that we keep, all of our practice, our meditation, everything that we do on the path creates this foundation for joy and happiness and contentment in the present moment and also in the future. Online. In fact, we have it on our website. You can download a PDF.
Particular book.
You can even put it on your Kindle.
Stillness Flowing is the biography of Ajahn Chah, and it's really beautiful. It's kind of fat, but I've read it twice, and I just don't want it to end. It's very inspiring, and we're going through this section where Ajahn Chah is talking about meditation. Let me see if there's one quote that might be of interest. I think we've covered a lot of these things. Keeping the practice going. Right now. I can tell you that I really greatly appreciate everyone's practice and your involvement in this conversation.
We appreciate your being here.
Immensely.
Immensely. Happy to.
May I say something that's beyond the practice, which I'm very grateful for today? Mayura and Lynn, I was listening to Mayura asked me to make an announcement if they weren't here about the two of you being on retreat.
Oh, huh.
Not, and hoping that people would step up and provide support for the two of you, especially regarding food and support. So I think that Mayura is going to put something on the website. I don't know if she's done.
It's already there.
Okay, yeah. So
It's there. You can write to Mayura. Her email is on our website, karunabv.org, in case you want to get involved. She's really organizing so that there's a team of local people who bring food and take trash away, and there are a few people who are signed up to stay, Elizabeth being one of them. We're having people who have already been at the Hermitage before, so they don't need to have a lot of orientation, and we're intending to be using the whole 3 months for practice for ourselves, and then of course people who are staying can practice, but people who are local can bring food out, and people who are living farther away, Mayor is making this kind of organizing this kind of way of being able to support through offering donations for the food, and then the local people are kind of, she calls it the hands and feet, to bring the food out and offer it.
Maybe we donate today.
I think Ellison has a method for that.
Yeah, on the table with the owls, there's a bowl.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna chant. Are you up for that, sister? So there's a chant that we use that's called a victory chant.
She's drinking stuff, it's already ready.
Try to get the the throat ready. So the victory chant and then the blessings, and I think we'll do Namo Tassa first. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Jayanto Bodhiyamule Sakyana Nandi Vadano Ewang Tawang Vijayo Ho Hijaya Sujaya Mangale Aparajita Palanke Sise Patavipokare Abhiseke Sababudana Agapato Pamodati Sunakatang Sumangalang Supapatang Suhutitang Sukano Sumahuto Chasuitang Brahmachari Supadakinang Kaya kamang vacha kamang padakina mano kamang panidite padakina nikatwana labantate padakine. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you. By the power of all the Buddhas, may you ever be well. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you. By the power of all the Dhamma, may you ever be well. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you. By the power of all the Sangha, may you ever be well. So next time, it will not be June, it will be July, because we're going to be teaching a retreat during June up in southern Washington. So chapter 6, the pacification and the insights that follow. And there'll be, according, let's see, I think the next section in Stillness Flowing, starting on page 360, Calm and Insight, section 4. So that's what we'll be covering next time. I'll put that on the page, and that'll be July. Probably the second Saturday, I think, in July. And then we're going to have 3 months off for the Vassa, and we'll pick it up again in November, I think.
Does anyone happen to know the dates of Ajahn Amara's retreat at Spirit Rock? No.
I don't. You can probably find it by
Waitlisted on that.
Google. Yeah. Okay, everyone. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you.